This is a map of Iowa's railroads. You can see a clear focus on east-west movement. This makes sense. Iowa has always been a farming state, and they historically needed to export their crops to hubs like Chicago and on the East Coast. This economic reliance on agriculture is something that Iowa has tried to move away from. It's always risky to depend so heavily on commodity exports, and it left the state vulnerable to shocks like the 1980s farm crisis. So what does this have to do with railroads? It's because of how that east-west focus came to be. Back in the 1850s, Congress decided to spur economic growth on the American frontier by granting land to private companies, with the expectation that these companies would build and operate railroads. The advantage of this was that private companies would pay for everything, but it also meant that new railroads would be built to prioritize market needs. And what the market needed at that time was a way to efficiently move Iowa's agricultural exports to Chicago and the East Coast, not to move people and goods within Iowa. So that's exactly what happened. These federal grants helped create 5 main rail lines in Iowa, none of which ran north to south. The interesting thing is that there were plenty of proposals for north-south routes that would have spurred economic development beyond agriculture. These vertical routes would cut across all 5 main lines and create local economic hubs. It would also connect to major cities like St. Paul and St. Louis, reducing dependence on Chicago and obviating the need for punitive tariffs that nobody liked. It's just that private companies, many with ties to trade and industry on the East Coast, weren't interested in bidding for these less lucrative north-south routes. And if you're wondering why the state couldn't just put up the money themselves, it's because their constitution placed heavy restrictions on their ability to take on debt. It is what it is. Without federal support, north-south routes went through a start-stop shit show to be constructed, with the proposed Iowa Central spending 3 decades in precarious financial condition with a round of receiverships, shifts in management, and constant name changing. Iowa eventually got their north-south routes, but these were far less direct and came decades after east-west development had already been firmly established. It's impossible to say if building a north-south railroad sooner would have given Iowa a more diverse economy, but not having this local link meant that they weren't really given a choice. And that's why the details of infrastructure procurement matter a lot. Where you get your funding from dictates what gets built. And, at the risk of sounding dramatic, what gets built ends up controlling your destiny. This isn't to say that private sector involvement is inherently good or bad. It just means that whatever gets built will inevitably be influenced by market needs that are relatively short-term and don't often consider the full public good. That's just part of the trade-off, because the upside is obvious too. Iowa did get 5 railroads.
For many years, the railroad was Ridgeway's lifeline to the rest of the world.
And Major League Baseball.
Hits it in the air to right. Back at the wall, and the White Sox win it.
If you like this kind of stuff, I also made a video about the unique procurement model of America's historic streetcars. That was a heavily private approach as well, and there are plenty of lessons we can draw from that about how to build better transit today. Check it out.